In the silent forest, a bobcat moved like a shadow, weaving through the tall pine trees and the frozen underbrush. Her paws barely making a sound on the hard snow as she crept forward, she noticed the cold air carrying the faint scent of something unusual. Something fragile that made her pause and tilt her head. She had hunted in this forest for years, and yet there were times when the wind and the whispers of the trees told her that there was more hidden than the eyes could see her amber. Eyes narrowed as she scanned the surroundings looking for movement or the slightest sign of life beneath the heavy branches and the deep snowdrifts. She heard a soft whimper, a sound so faint that at first she thought it was her imagination, but then it came again, trembling and weak, and it tugged at something deep inside her. Instinct screamed caution, yet curiosity pushed her closer. She stepped lightly over a fallen branch and paused behind a thick clump of bushes, peering through the icy leaves and snow toward the source of the sound. There, in a small depression in the snow, lay a tiny bundle curled up as if trying to disappear from the world. The creature was small enough to fit in her paws, yet so fragile that even the wind seemed to bend around it as if protecting it from the cold. She crouched lower, trying to get a better look. The kitten was shivering violently, its tiny body quivering with every breath, and the snow clung to its fur, making it look even smaller, and weaker her instincts told her to move away, that the forest was harsh and merciless. But something about the kitten stirred a strange feeling. She had never known before a mixture of tenderness and urgency that made her muscles tense and her heart beat faster. She circled the depression, slowly sniffing the air to make sure it was safe. Nothing moved around her. No birds, no other animals, just the endless white expanse stretching in every direction. The snow crunched lightly beneath her paws. As she edged closer to the kitten, her tail flicking nervously, she studied it intently and noticed that its eyes were barely open and its tiny mouth opened in a silent cry. She lowered her head and nudged the kitten gently with the tip of her nose. It made a faint sound and curled closer to itself. She waited for a moment, unsure what to do. Feeling the weight of the cold and the vulnerability of the tiny life before her, she looked around the forest again. The trees stood tall and silent. The wind swept through the branches, carrying flakes of snow that landed softly on her fur. She could hear her own breathing mingling with the distant sound of an owl somewhere high in the canopy and the faint rustle of a squirrel in the underbrush. Yet the kitten remained still and fragile, as if frozen into the very fabric of the snow itself. She considered the dangers she could face staying in the open to protect it, or moving it somewhere hidden. Her instincts warred with her compassion. For the tiny creature, she circled once more, and then settled on kneeling close enough to keep the kitten in her sight. Without alarming it, she sniffed the air and listened to the wind shifting through the trees and thought about the hours that had passed since the kitten must have been left there. Abandoned or lost, or perhaps separated from its mother. She did not know yet. A sense of purpose filled her body. A determination to make a choice that went beyond survival and instinct. She could feel the cold biting at her paws and fur, yet the warmth of her own determination seemed to spread through her body. She lowered her head and let her tongue lightly touch the kitten, brushing away some of the ice crystals that clung stubbornly to its fur. She waited again and noticed a faint flicker of movement. The kitten had responded to her touch, raising its tiny head slightly. Her heart leapt, and she wondered how something so fragile could inspire such a fierce urge to protect. She circled, once more checking the surroundings for any threat, and then sat down a safe distance away to keep watch. As the wind whispered through the trees, the snow sparkled like tiny crystals, catching the faint light filtering through the dense canopy. Fimbao could feel the tension in her muscles as she remained poised, ready to react. If danger came, yet unwilling to leave the fragile creature alone, the minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The forest seemed to hold its breath around them, and she marveled at the stillness, the way even the wind seemed to respect the fragile moment. The kitten let out another soft whimper, and she edged a little closer, nudging it again this time. More firmly, it twitched and made a weak attempt to crawl. Toward her, she realized that it could not survive alone in this cold and harsh forest, and a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable began to form inside her mind. She could take it to her den, a place where she could keep it warm and safe at least for a while, The thought made her heart pound and her muscles tense as she considered the effort it would take. She glanced around one last time, ensuring no other predator or threat lurked nearby, and then carefully lowered herself to the ground next to the tiny kitten, letting her body shield it from the wind and snow. She let it rest against her side, noticing how fragile its body was, how small its claws were, and how its faint purrs barely reached her ears. She closed her eyes for a moment and breathed slowly, letting her own warmth mingle with the kitten, hoping against hope that this small act of care could make a difference in the unforgiving wilderness. She could hear the distant crack of ice falling from the branches and the faint rustle of a rabbit moving hurriedly through the snow. Yet she remained motionless, attentive to every sound, every shift in the snow. The kitten's breathing grew steadier against her side, and she realized that even the smallest spark of life could ignite a sense of purpose stronger than any fear she had known in the forest. The world seemed vast and cold. Yet in this small space, the bond between predator and fragile life formed silently without words, unbroken by the wind or snow. And in that moment, the forest did not feel endless and merciless, but alive and watching and full of possibility. The bobcat stayed motionless for what seemed like an eternity, her amber eyes fixed on the tiny kitten pressed against her side. Feeling the faint warmth of its trembling body against her own, she could hear the wind whipping through the tall pines and the snow crunching under her paws as she shifted slightly to create a small pocket of protection. The kitten stirred and let out a soft mew that tugged at something deep within her. Instincts. She had never felt such an urgent need to protect another creature. Yet every fiber of her being was telling her to move cautiously. She looked around the forest, the dense underbrush and twisted branches casting shadows that seemed alive and shifting as the sun dipped lower in the sky. The light became dim and the forest more foreboding. Every sound was amplified. The snap of a twig in the distance, the soft rustle of leaves even, the faint drip of melting snow from the branches above. She felt the tension rise in her muscles, knowing that any predator or careless movement could mean disaster for the tiny creature. She pressed closer, letting her own warmth seep into the kitten, and watched as it slowly tried to nuzzle into her fur. She felt a pang of fear that it might be too late yet. The faint beat of its small heart gave her hope she could feel its weakness, its vulnerability, yet there was a quiet strength in its determination. To cling to life, she shifted again, trying to get a better sense of how to move without causing harm. Thinking about the den, she could take it to a small hidden space, beneath the roots of an old tree where the snow would not penetrate, and the wind would be muffled. She weighed the risks. Moving too quickly could endanger the kitten, moving too slowly could leave it exposed to the unforgiving cold. She made her decision and gently nudged the kitten with her nose, urging it toward her. She could feel it respond and tentatively crawl toward the small space she had prepared, creating a small pocket with her paws. She waited, letting the kitten gain strength as she stayed alert, scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of danger she could. Sense the tension in the trees, the way the wind shifted and the shadows seemed to deepen with every passing moment. She heard a distant cry of a bird, a warning maybe, or a signal. Yet she could not afford to lose focus. She had to keep the kitten safe. Her thoughts raced as she considered the hours ahead. The cold would not relent. The snow would not stop falling, and night would soon drape the forest in darkness, where every sound was magnified and every shadow seemed to hold threat. She crouched low and allowed herself a moment to assess the situation. Her muscles coiled, ready to move. Her ears flicked toward every sound. The kitten stirred again, and she realized it was relying entirely on her instincts, her experience, her courage to survive. In this unforgiving world, she felt a surge of responsibility, unlike anything she had known before. She gently pushed the kitten with her nose, encouraging it to move a little further into the safe space she had created, and watched as it hesitated. Shaking and vulnerable, yet somehow determined to survive, she whispered softly to herself, though no words passed her lips, and she felt a strange connection forming between them, a bond of trust and mutual reliance that transcended the language of the forest. The wind howled through the trees, and snow swirled around them, creating a dizzying curtain of white. But the bobcat remained focused, each step deliberate, careful. Precise as she moved the kitten inch by inch, she could feel the tension, building in her own body the awareness that any misstep could be catastrophic. Yet she could not abandon this fragile life. She felt a new kind of fear, one that was tempered by determination and compassion. The kitten trembled in her paws, and she felt the weight of its vulnerability pressing into her heart. She could not let it go. She circled around again, ensuring the area was free of danger before making her next move. She nudged the kitten once more and guided it toward a small hollow beneath the roots of a fallen tree. A space she knew would provide shelter from the elements. She could hear the faint creak of branches and the soft scurry of small animals nearby. Yet she remained, alert, ready to defend the tiny creature from any threat. She lowered her body fully into the snow, creating a protective barrier around the kitten, and let it crawl into the hollow. She watched intently as it curled into the small nest she had formed, and noticed a flicker of movement in its tiny body, a spark of life that gave her hope. She pressed closer, letting her warmth radiate into the hollow. The cold seemed less severe, with her body shielding it from the biting wind. She remained motionless, listening to the sounds of the forest, the soft whistle of the wind through the trees, the distant thump of a branch falling, the faint rustle of animals moving through the snow. She realized that in this moment, every second was precious, every movement critical. She could not afford to relax her vigilance. She waited, letting the kitten rest and regain strength, watching its tiny chest rise and fall with each breath. She considered what she would do next, how she could ensure its survival through the night. The forest could be merciless at any moment, the temperature dropping dangerously low and the snowfall increasing. She felt the urgency of her mission keenly and weighed her options. She could keep it close to her body and slowly move to a larger den deeper in the forest, or she could remain here and wait for dawn, hoping the sun would bring some warmth. The kitten stirred again, and she sensed a flicker of fear in its movements. It had felt the cold. It had felt the vulnerability. It had clung to her instincts as she had clung to hers. She realized that this was more than survival. This was a test of patience, courage, and trust. She shifted slightly, allowing herself to press against the kitten, offering more warmth. She could feel its small heart beating faster and the slight tremor in its body subsiding. She remained alert to every sound, every shadow in the forest. She could hear the distant call of a predator, a faint howl in the distance, and her muscles tensed ready. To protect the tiny life in her care, she nudged the kitten gently again, and it responded, curling closer to her. She felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with relief. This fragile creature was alive, and responding to her care. She considered the hours. Ahead, the long night that would stretch before them, the cold that would seep through the trees and the snow that would continue to fall. Yet she felt a strange calm in the midst of the tension she had faced, the uncertainty, the fear, and had chosen compassion over caution. She could feel a bond forming that was invisible, yet powerful, a connection that transcended the usual roles of predator and prey. She realized that the forest seemed less harsh, less empty in this small space where life and care intersected. She pressed closer to the kitten, letting her body radiate warmth, and waited, listening to the forest breathe with them. She could sense the fragility of life in every snowflake, in every gust of wind, and yet she felt the strength of purpose that came with protecting something so vulnerable. She knew the hours ahead would be long. The night would bring more challenges, but she felt ready for them. The kitten shifted slightly, moving toward her warmth, and she felt a deep sense of accomplishment, that it trusted her, that it clung to her instincts for survival and for care. She shifted again, letting it nestle against her, and realized that even in the harshest winter, there could be moments of profound connection. She listened to its soft breathing and allowed herself a moment to appreciate the stillness of the forest, the quiet anticipation that something miraculous could happen. The kitten stirred once more, curling into her side, and she felt the life pulsing against her own. She remained alert, every sense attuned to the forest, the shadows, the wind, the distant sounds of animals moving in the snow. Yet she felt a strange comfort in the presence of this fragile creature that relied entirely on her instincts and care. She thought about the night ahead, the dangers that lurked unseen, the cold that would press against them both. And she resolved to do whatever it took to keep the kitten alive. She pressed herself closer, letting warmth flow between them, creating a small pocket of safety, and felt the kitten respond with a soft purr, a tiny sound that seemed to echo through the forest, a signal of life and trust. She could feel the tension in her own muscles slowly easing, knowing that the kitten was alive. And aware of her presence, she shifted slightly and nudged it gently again, encouraging it to move further into the hollow. The kitten responded tentatively, inching closer to her warmth, and she felt a wave of relief and satisfaction. The hours passed. Slowly, the wind whipping through the trees, the snow falling in soft, endless layers covering the forest floor. The bobcat remained vigilant, every sense attuned to the environment. Yet in this small space, the kitten was protected and slowly regaining strength. She realized that survival was more than hunting or hiding. It was about connection, trust, and courage. And in this moment, she embodied all three. She pressed closer, letting warmth flow between them, and listened to the soft, faint purring of the tiny creature as the forest held its breath around them both. The night grew colder and darker, the forest wrapped in silence and snow. The bobcat remained pressed against the tiny kitten, feeling the fragile heartbeat against her own. She could hear the distant howl of wolves far off, yet the hollow they were in provided a shield from the cold and the dangers. She kept her ears flicking toward every sound, every movement outside the roots. The kitten shifted slightly, nestling closer, seeking warmth, and she could feel its tiny body relaxing against her. She allowed herself a brief moment of calm, yet her instincts remained alert. Knowing that predators could be near, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of danger and the soft rustle of unseen creatures. Yet she did not move. Instead, she pressed her body more firmly against the kitten, radiating warmth and protection. She could feel its small breath against her fur and a faint purr escaping as it adjusted. To the security of her presence, she thought about the day ahead, the hours they had survived, and the uncertainty of what lay beyond the night. She knew the sun would rise, eventually bringing light and perhaps more safety. Yet, she remained focused. On the present, every second counted, every breath mattered. She shifted slightly, nudging the kitten, gently encouraging it to move closer to the center of the hollow. Where the warmth was greatest, it responded tentatively, curling against her side, and she felt a wave of relief wash through her body. She realized that this tiny creature now relied entirely on her for survival, and she embraced the responsibility with a fierce determination. The snow continued to fall outside, soft and relentless, creating a blanket over the forest, and the hollow seemed like a small island of warmth in the endless cold. She pressed closer, letting her body radiate heat. The kitten pressed against her side, trusting instinctively as she had trusted herself. The minutes stretched into hours. The wind grew stronger and the trees swayed, making eerie sounds that could have alarmed a lesser creature. Yet the bobcat remained unwavering, her focus on the fragile life she protected. She could feel the kitten gaining strength slowly, its shivers lessening, and its tiny claws clutching at her fur. For reassurance, she allowed herself a small sigh of relief, knowing that the immediate danger of freezing had passed. Yet she could not let her guard down. The forest was vast and merciless, and even the smallest misstep could bring disaster. She nudged the kitten again, letting it adjust to her presence, and she felt the small purr grow louder, a sound that filled her with a strange joy she had never known. That caring for something so small could ignite such a fierce, protective instinct. She pressed herself fully around the kitten, shielding it from the wind and snow, her tail curling around them both, creating a cocoon of warmth. She felt its tiny body relax completely, and she knew for the first time in a long while that she could provide something more than survival. She could provide comfort and safety. The night dragged on, the wind howled, the snow fell. But within the hollow, there was only the sound of their breathing, the small heartbeat of the kitten, and the steady pulse of her own life. A bond had formed, silent, unspoken, unbreakable in the stillness of the forest. She realized that she had chosen a path of compassion over caution, and in doing so, she had found a new strength. She shifted again, letting the kitten settle into the warmth of her fur, and it pressed against her side, seeking comfort and protection. She felt its fragile trust, and in response, she offered every ounce of her own strength, warmth, and vigilance. The hours passed slowly, the cold pressing against the roots and the snow piling higher outside. Yet inside the hollow, there was a quiet triumph, a victory of life over the harshness of the forest. The kitten stirred again, making small movements exploring the edges of the hollow, and she allowed it to do so under her watchful gaze. It patted her fur with tiny paws, and she felt a thrill of connection that transcended words. She nudged it gently, guiding it back to the warm center, and it pressed against her gratefully. The first hints of dawn began to light the sky, casting a pale glow through the trees, and she could feel the warmth of the sun.